Happy Friday. How's everybody doing today? You see the thumbnail. So, here we get started in a minute. I try to go live once a week, so I've been struggling this week, so trying to make it happen. So, let me check a few things. You know how we do it. If you got any tech comments or cybersecurity comments, just drop them in the box and we'll get to it. Just want to make sure I can see myself on the phone. Make sure I'm doing all right. So, okay. Once again, about to get started on the GDPR. Okay, there. So, once again, if you got anything, drop them in the box. So, you got the chat. What up, Kenny? Glad you can make it. Give me a one if you can hear me. It's about to get started. You said doing a little GDPR, a little privacy, something a little different on that GRC life. Once again, happy Friday, everybody. So we're gonna get started. Once again, if you got any, I appreciate that, Kenny. If you got any tech questions or cybersecurity questions, just drop them in the box and we'll get to them. Um, for the new people, I'm Professor Black Ops. I've been in IT for 30 years and I've been in the cybersecurity about 15 years, doing a myriad of different things, everything from web admin, development. I was a DBA for 5 years. Currently, I do a lot of NIST 800-53, and part of NIST 800-53 is I appreciate that Ken GRC in the building. I do a little more privacy, and part of NIST there's a privacy security family, so everybody's adding privacy to the game. One of the big deals, even though we're in the United States, is GDPR. So if you happen to have some European customers in your database, apply to GDPR. And the weird thing is, California was doing a lot of GDPR. If you had California people, they actually referenced GDPR in CCPA. So I think Cali was trying to out privacy everybody. So they were doing a lot of GDPR, right? Which is, you said at the top, General Data Protection Regulation. If you look down at the thumbnail at the bottom of that, right, there's privacy laws around the world. So one reason privacy gets paid is usually you're dealing with a national company, right? You're dealing with Amazon, big insurance companies, big government companies. A lot of them handle GDPR because they're doing customers around the world, right? So that's one big deal. So that's one reason I want to hit on GDPR, because I'm in a ton of meetings and it always kind of like pokes up a little bit, or somebody has a general question on it, right? Then part of GRC, right, is governance, risk, and compliance. A lot of times in compliance is data privacy, right? So that could be GDPR, which you see is right there. CCPA is Europe. PIPA, I think, is COPA is Canada. So there's a ton of privacy. So things. What's up, Wire Dog? Glad you can join me. So that's one reason we want to touch on it, because even if it's not GDPR, you should understand at a high level privacy laws in different countries around the world if you're in a national company, right? And even in the United States, you got CCPA, and a lot of states are really doing their own privacy per state. So if you're doing RFPs, RFIs, or you building something, you probably need to go to each state and see what their privacy laws is. If you're doing business in that state, you would think we would at least have a national privacy law. I think we're getting there, but we're not quite there yet, right? So you as a person or a company, or if you're trying to get your skills up, even if you're engineering, and we're going to look at there, it's called privacy engineer. You should understand at a high level CCPA, GDPR, and privacy. Why? Because when you build an architecture, one of the things we're going to talk about is how are you handling cookies, how are you handling encryption, right? All that in your architecture will let you know if you're approved to do certain privacy laws. Once again, I do a lot of NIST 800-53, and I do a lot of STIG implementations, right? The NIST rolls down security implementations. I usually do a STIG, CIS, There's some NSA. So depending on how you implement your architecture, right, it's going to let you know if you're approved to do certain privacy laws. So once again, if you got any specific questions, throw them in the box, and we're just about to get into it. So once again, here is privacy around the world. A lot of your big companies, big companies are doing Amazon, Azure, Google, right? They have to make sure they have all these privacy laws embedded in their architecture when you do those clouds, right? I try to be at AWS. I wouldn't say SME, but I'm building my skill set. So AWS in their architecture, I think they have 90% of these privacy laws you could talk about when you building your EC2s, when you doing your VPCs, when you talk about doing disaster recovery in another nation, what laws applies when you do DR in that country, right? So that's one reason I think, once again, privacy is kind of hidden. It only sneaks up with you. And a lot of times too is when you get security requirements, these are the security requirements you need to build your architecture, right? So I think a lot of people ask where security requirements come from. A lot of times they come from these privacy laws, depending on which jurisdiction you are in on the globe, right? So I think a lot of people forget that. So here's one. I put out a couple Indeed jobs. Shout out to Women Analytics and Black Heights. So there's a privacy manager, and we're going to talk about privacy and data protection officer, right? TikTok, which is crazy. You know, that's a Chinese company, but they paying $200,000, $300,000 a year if you're a privacy program manager. We see in number 3, GDPR, CCPA, COPA. COPA is the child law, but once again, we were looking at the globe, right? And we know TikTok is on is in every country, every continent on the planet, right? So you need to understand that from a privacy program manager, right? And how does that work? And here we're going to talk about, there's a few certifications. CIPP, CIPT, and CIPM are privacy certifications. So we're going to touch on those a little bit. But we always talk about getting the bag. Shout out to Black Heights and Women Analytics. So if you want to be a data privacy officer, let's be realistic. That's really all paperwork. You're not really building enough, right? You're giving the requirements to the engineer. The engineer is building it, but since you're responsible, you get that $300,000 bag, right? PBO ain't got much longer. He trying to get the 300. I ain't the 300, right? But once again, privacy is a different bag, right? Because now when you're in privacy, usually you're talking about global security, right? Or global compliance, right? A lot of times you work with the compliance director and the security director and the privacy. Big companies, those are 3 separate jobs. Small company, that's really one job, right? So we're going to pick in that. And one more job, like I said, shout out to Women in Linux. Go check them out. Shout out to Black Heights right there. They always talking about getting the bag. So here's another one. Coinbase, 200,000. Once again, they had the GDPR in there, privacy protection. We talked about encryption, regular privacy assessments, and they also have customers in GDPR, right? So once again, they're looking for a privacy engineer. I like how you just put engineer on there, but engineer you do, like you said, design and implement foundational digital asset infrastructure components used by the engineering team, right? So you're gonna help them to design and make sure the privacy. And we're gonna talk about encryption, cookies, the right to delete yourself, right? So those are our requirements. We're just gonna touch on in GDPR and once again at privacy. Shout out to Engineering Cannabis. That's the guy I goes to when we're talking about machine learning, artificial intelligence. He's AI and ME. Go check him out. But yeah, that's the 237. But once again, privacy is a hidden gem. What's up, casual economists? Catching up on 2XP. That's cool. I think my man called that the hybrid team. But now, once again, though, there's jobs in privacy. Part of check out the key to the GRC. Right, you're really doing paperwork, you're really doing assessments, and a lot of times when you get in privacy, you are dealing with a global company, right? That's where the bag comes in, dealing with those big companies. We just looked at TikTok right there with the 300,000, Coinbase, which we know they're in every continent. So let's talk about some of the certifications. Personal and professional data, such as identification information for payments, Contact details, personal records are frequently used by organizations. Organizations usually work to safeguard data to avoid and resolve issues like fraud and identity. A good reputation protect confidential integrity. Organizations are increasingly seeking data privacy officers to assist them in managing and preventing cyber attack. With the data privacy certifications, you can demonstrate your understanding. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the United States, uh, the mark of the privacy officer and information security analyst will increase 30% between 2020 and 2030. Right, so that's a third, right, which is healthy growth. Right, so that's why once again I think privacy is a hidden gem. I put it with GRC. I work in the industry, and all times we're talking about GDPR, Mexico, different continents where big corporations I work at, they're a multi continent thing, right? So the big certifications in there, we're going to talk about 5 real quick, is the Certified Information Privacy Professionals / Europe, Certification Enterprise Worldwide, and strengthening compliance and risk mitigation procedures, providing professionals with the knowledge to deliver more value to the firm. You could be a compliance lead, 82, sales professional, data privacy engineer. We looked at their data privacy officer and risk privacy officer, right? So these are probably medium salaries for these jobs, right? So I've been everything from a compliance lead to I've done data privacy, but I've done it inside of NIST 800-53. There's a privacy family in there. So that's kind of where I would say inject my skills. Like we said, unless you're a global company, you're actually going to do this inside of the compliance team. A lot of times I work with the compliance team and the security team. So inside the compliance team, a lot of times they work on the privacy piece, right? So so that's it. So let's go through a couple more of these certifications. I'm actually thinking about getting the CIPP, but I've been trying to get the CISP for 15 years, right? So that's my goal this year, is to focus on the CISP. Then hopefully I want to get the CISP and the CIPP, but we're gonna see. PBO tired. So let's look at one real quick. PBO getting old. Let's see. PBO getting old. So let's look at the next one. Of course, I had a ton of them. The CIPM, that's the privacy manager. Incorporates privacy program operational life cycle to show the understanding and ability to implement privacy and data protection standards, develop, assess, and improve privacy. That's why I say a lot of times it's in with GRC, because GRC is going to do a lot of this from the data perspective, right? You developing policies and procedure, you developing SOPs, right? You developing assessments and RARs, and I've been in government too long. But a lot of times when you do that, you just add the privacy piece to that, right? So when you talk about encryption and encryption at rest, IRS, how you're going to shred, which is part of privacy. Part of shredding is the physical deletion. Then you're going to have the computer deletion, right? You put those together, right? You know, privacy. And a lot of times the cybersecurity manager, you at 140, the program manager 160, privacy analyst 93, data privacy engineer 90, right? So once you get that manager cert, right, you're over teams, you're over department. And a lot of times the bigger companies, you're actually a director inside compliance as a piece of that, right? Then on the compliance, you're going to have your privacy manager, or even your privacy director for your larger companies. What's up, John? Glad you can join us. Let's see. What's up? What are your suggestions in understanding cybersecurity? Try to understand that in respect to AI, artificial intelligence. That's actually an excellent question. I'm actually going to start doing a little more of that. Of course, engineering cannabis, we talking about artificial intelligence. A lot of times with AWS, if you go to their detective, it looks through your, like we talked about, your architecture to see if you're set up for certain privacy, aka GDPR, CCPA. So what does that mean from like you say, an AI machine learning, they know inside their architecture, which you have to help set up and feed the machine learning. Are you using the proper level of encryption? Are you using the proper level of encryption for a key? Right? You could be using a key at 68. Theoretically, I could brute force that, right? So your artificial intelligence is going to say you need to be doing this at 2048 because artificial intelligence is going to tell you these are the best practices used for GDPR and this type of architecture. When you set up for AWS, Azure has their own part too, right? We're talking about multi-cloud. So a lot of those tools are building in artificial intelligence, machine learning, because shout out to AWS, they're going to give you a reference architecture that says GDPR should be set up like this. Right now, you might have some special business requirements that means you need to do something different, but the base architecture with artificial machine learning would say, okay, this is set up for a basic. What do you need to enhance that, right? So once again, and I'm gonna do some more AWS. I took a look at AWS, looking at that detective, looking at Copilot, and it talks about the best of breed. They cookbook. What should you set up for a basic setup, right? To make sure you're good. And they use artificial intelligence through their big customers to figure out what is the reference based architecture for that. Oh, true. Because the privacy. Yeah, that is true. Because, like you said, privacy pretty much is usually last because especially when you're small and you're trying to build up, if you're big, you trying to get your features set up, you're trying to get your architecture set up. Let's be real, you trying to get some basic security set up. So the last thing after security is going to be privacy. So if we're struggling with security, we definitely going to be struggling with privacy. So now, yeah, that's correct, Wire Dog. So a lot of times you can add value if you can bring that stuff. Of course, the earlier you can do it in development, the cheaper it is. Right. Then a lot of times when people build stuff, they don't even think about security no less than privacy. And once again, if you're doing business in CCPAs in California, New York has some new privacy laws. I think they trying to outdo Cali. Oregon, I think, is in there. So you need to figure out, and I'll probably do another stream, what states have special privacy laws. I should have done it in here. PBL was falling behind. TGIF though, happy Friday. Another one, too, is a certified privacy technologist. And that's where, once again, where you actually build it and you have privacy in there. A lot of the other ones, they're analysts. They're going to review your setup. This is teaching you how to set up, once again, your architecture. AWS, your VPC, which is your subnets, your networking, who can communicate what and how to communicate it. In there too is your keys. How do you do encryption of keys? What's the length of your keys? How do you move files? Is your database encrypted? What database are you using? Web server? How's all that encryption, right? Your privacy technologist would do an assessment to make sure all those are set up properly, right? So data security companies around the world are implementing legislation governing how data is collected, stored, and used. As a result, information data and other experts with dual literacy in privacy and technology. I like that. I got to read that again. Dual literacy in privacy and technology are essential to ensure operation achieve privacy goals and reduce risks. And so those are certified information privacy technology certifications. IAPP certified incorporates data protection at every level of development to create products, services, and business procedures that respect your privacy, right? And a big one of that is GDPR, because Facebook and them getting fined $400 million, $200 million, right? Of course, they can scratch those checks, but GDPR fines are huge, right? Then if you got that cert and you're a cybersecurity manager, since you got the dual literacy of privacy and technology, you won 40. Program manager, you won 65. Privacy analyst, you're 93. Data privacy engineer, you're 90, right? And we always trying to get to that elusive 100K, 6 figures, right? It's only small population that's reaching that. So check out that privacy. Here's another one, certified data privacy solution engineer. They just be coming up with certs, but once again, it's the ISICA has the first experience-based technical certifications. is intended for professionals with technical expertise and data privacy governance, architecture, and life cycle. Once again, IT audit analyst, 75. Senior privacy manager, I think that's 106. I think they messed it up. Incident response engineer and data privacy analyst. So a lot of times when you're doing your incident response, you need to understand the privacy laws to figure out what is your reporting requirements, right? I think GDPR was 72 hours. CCPA, I think they were 24 hours. But you need to understand from an incident response, when do you have to let these states know? Because if you're late, your fine's going to get bigger, right? So that's one reason those guys get paid, because they need to understand those reporting requirements. So if you get hacked, when do you need to report to that state or government agency or Europe, right? Or Mexico. Hey, up in the chat, you're about to get a swarm of lots because they use these AI without saying how it works. Oh, I agree with that. I agree. I don't think AWS is alone at that engineering cannabis. So engineering cannabis, that AWS and chat are about to get a swarm of lawsuits because of use of these AIs without explaining how they work and biases in data and security. I think a lot of people are going to get sued. The only reason I say they probably won't get sued is if you look like AWS, you got to opt into a lot of these terms and agreements, and they cover their butt well in those terms and agreements. But even with those terms and agreements, I agree with you, engineer. They're going to get sued, but AWS has buildings of lawyers. They get sued every day. So I think they're about that suit life, though. So here's another one. So certified data privacy professionals. So you can look those up once again and see if you want to get in that privacy game. So let's get into when GDPR started and delve in. Once again, throw those questions in the chat or statements. Let's get into it. So GDPR was started in Europe in 2018, requires organizations to safeguard personal data and uphold privacy rights of anyone in the EU territory. The regulation includes 7 principles of data protection that must be implemented and 8 privacy rights that must be facilitated. We're going to touch on each one of those. It empowers member state level data protection authorities to enforce GDPR with sanctions and fines. They be fining people in the U.S., the big companies. GDPR was replaced in 1995, Data Protection Directive, which created a country-by-country patchwork. GDPR passed the European Parliament with overwhelming majority unifies EU under one standard data protection regime, right? And I think the United States need to get there, right? What is our single data protection? GDPR, once again, is that of Europe. But if you're a big company, you have customers in Europe, or even if you have Europe tourists, if you put European people in your database, you're responsible for GDPR, and they lay out huge fines at the drop of a hat, right? So an organization that processes personal data of people in the EU must comply with it. Processing is a broad term that covers just about anything. It covers collection, storage, transmission, analysis. Personal data is any information that relates to a person, such as name, email address. Now here you go, IP address, eye color, political affiliation, and so on. Even if the organization is not connected to the EU itself, if it processes personal data of people in the EU, that's bold right there. Be it tracking on your website, you must comply with GDPR. It also has not limited to for-profit companies, meaning non-for-profits could get fined too. But the big deal is personal data of people in the EU tracking. So if you're taking cookies of people in the EU, you have to abide by GDPR, right? So I think that's why a lot of companies are pushing back, right, for that and trying to figure out what's the best way to handle it, right? So what is personal data? Personal data is any information that relates to an individual that can be directly or indirectly identified. Once again, names, email address, locations information, ethnicity, gender, biometric data, religious beliefs, web cookies, political opinions can also be personal data. Data can also fall under definition if it relatively easy to ID someone from it, right? So What is data processing? Any action performed on data, whether automated or manual. This example is cited in text, including collecting, recording, organizing, structuring, storing, using, erasing. So basically anything, right? What is a data subject? The person whose data is processed. They are your customers or site visitors, right? The person whose data is processed. These are your customers or site visit, right? So that could be the company, right? So once again, it's so broad. The data collector, the person who decided why and how personal data will be processed. If you're an owner or employee of your organization handling data, this is you. So I think this is very important because a lot of people are in companies, they're collecting data. They don't know they could be sued by the EU. If you're the data collector, you're on the hook. You gonna get the company's gonna get sued. And if you're in charge of that division and you okay that, you personally gonna get sued, right? So I think a lot of people really don't understand that. The data processor, third party that processes personal data on behalf of the data collector. GDPR has special rules for these individual organizations. They could include cloud servicers like Turret or email service providers like Proton, right? So people use APIs, so you're collecting data into your infrastructure. Then you call out APIs to do stuff for you. Those APIs now are included in GDPR. So, but those APIs a lot of times are going to tell you we're not, you can't use us to process GDPR, right? So it's going to fall back on the data collector that authorize the use of those APIs, right? So once again, those certifications, those privacy, that's what you need to understand when you get into privacy. And I don't think a lot of people really think about that from a GRC perspective, right? A programming perspective, privacy engineering perspective. You want to do a product and you want it to grow worldwide like TikTok. We just saw TikTok's like, we need to get a privacy manager in there because they're right now what? They're in front of Congress now getting beat to a pulp, right? Your privacy engineer got to be in there talking. Oh, we're good, we're safe, we're protecting the privacy of the United States, right? That's why you get paid $300,000. We'll get back on that. We'll scroll back up there, right? That's what we're talking about. So, what is that officer? Data protection officer is one category, right? We saw the job. A lot of times it's under compliance, it's under privacy, and under privacy, you could have a data protection officer. Our organization, regardless of type or size, that handles EU residents' personal information, should have someone in an organization who's tasked with monitoring GDPR compliance, right? We call it 2 or 3 different names. You just need one. The public authority processing personal data is done in a public body of public authorities with exemption granted to courts and other independent. What's large-scale regular monitoring? The process of personal data is core activity to the organization who regularly and systematically observes its data subjects, which under GDPR means citizens or residential. That's TikTok, right? Why is that TikTok? TikTok takes people from in the EU, right? Then they're monitoring, tracking them, sending them ads, right? So that's large-scale regular monitoring, right? So that's why we just saw that job for TikTok for $300,000 for privacy, because Europe's gonna come and get you. Large scale special data categories. The process specific special data categories are defined by GDPR as part of an organizational core activities is done on a large scale, right? So basically, the you see is large. So we know TikTok is one of the biggest people in the United States, right? So they have to follow GDPR. So what is a data protection officer? Is an employee within your organization who is responsible for understanding GDPR and ensure your organizational compliance. The DPO is the main point of contact for Data Protection Authority. A lot of times in United States, that's under the compliance director. Typically, the DPO has knowledge of both information technology and law, right? We talked about that dual that dual skill, right? Technology, law, and really compliance. Compliance and laws are together, right? The controller and process shall ensure the data protection officer is involved properly in a timely manner in all issues which relate to protection of personal data Article 38 goes on to state and other employees in the organization aren't allowed to issue any instruction to the DPO regarding the performance of their tasks. Finally, the DPO is bound by confidentiality and performance of their tasks and will only report directly to the highest level of management at the organization. Right. So now they're trying to say the DPO is not going to even report to the compliance director. They actually want them to report directly to the CEO. Right, because there have been some debate is should the security officer report to the CIO or to the CEO, right? So I think you kind of coming in with that same thought pattern with the DPO, right? Data protection officer. See what my man's data privacy security, you always have to keep up with it. Oh, yeah, ever changing requirements, laws. And we'll look at it at the end, right? There's laws and privacy laws for a countries and continents throughout the globe, right? Each one of them are changing new law. And that's why a lot of times you need to get your machine learning and your artificial intelligence, because you can feed it the new laws and feed it the new federal regulations, right? So it'll be easy for it to keep up. But we know humans got to train it. So the humans got to keep up with the laws to be able to train it, right? But there's new federal and state laws coming out almost daily, right? So you need to make sure you at a high level are keeping it up. BLJ, the general, glad you can join us. Wait, okay, that's good. Shout out to Gail at night. I need to reach out to her and see how she's doing. So yeah, we talk a little bit about GDPR and privacy. I do cybersecurity a lot on the GRC, which is governance, risk, and compliance. And part of compliance, of course, now is privacy, privacy data, GDPR. The U.S. is really getting into privacy now and what that looks like. So what are some of the skills you need as a data processing officer? Over 5 years of experience with EU and global privacy laws, significant experience with IT programming or infrastructure, significant experience with audit informations, attestation audits and risks, leadership, because a lot of times you're going to be in there with management and stakeholders, general ability to continuously coordinate multiple parties, right? And that's the cool thing about it is a lot of times is you do mostly paperwork, right? You do assessment. Once again, we just talked about demonstrate records of engaging with emerging laws and technology, experience in legal and technical training and awareness, experience in dealing successfully with different business cultures and units, right? Because privacy cuts across different business units, right? So a lot of times a business wants to do something and they can't because of GDPR, or they want to do something, but technology is not ready, so we can't encrypt it, right? So that's where you have to get those business units in together and get everybody communicating on the same page. And the hard part about it that is your boards, your outside board, your directors, boards. Now they want to know about cybersecurity and privacy because when they get hacked, they get those big fines. So now the board seats are telling the CISO and the compliance director to come in and give presentations at that level, right? Because now people are getting sued and it's, of course, bubbling up. Everybody knows, once again, I do NIST. I was surprised GDPR says, hey, check out NIST. They cover big 5 areas: identity, protect, detect, respond, and recover. NIST helps you with hardening your infrastructure and designing your infrastructure in a secure way. So it's funny that GDPR reference a United States security compliance to protect its infrastructure. But hey, I feel like I'm a NIST SME, so it helps me. But once again, part of privacy is how you architecting your design. Once again, VPCs, your networking, even if you're on-prem, your database, your web server encryption, HTTPS, TLS, all of that is designed as for how do you protect your data. Once again, is which is the privacy part of that, right? So we were talking about data protection principles, lawfulness and fairness and transparency, purpose limitations, which is least privileges, data minimization, right? Should you collect this much data, or like all the big vendors, TikTok, Apple, Facebook, man, they just collect much data as possible and they figure it out on the back end, right? But GDPR said, hey, we need some minimization. Accuracy, there's a lot of data on the web is wrong. GDPR said if you're not accurate, we can come get you, right? Storage limitations, when should you delete it? Integrity and confidentiality and accountability, right? The data controller is responsible for being able to demonstrate GDPR compliance, right? And once again, if you're doing GRC, you're doing compliance for NIST, HIPAA if you're a hospital, FERPA if education. So GDPR is just another compliance you have to understand, right, from that level. And that's why those people get paid well, because now you got to be HIPAA, GDPR, PCI if you're taking credit cards. So there's just a lot of compliances that you need to keep up with, right, to make sure you're secure. Right. So once again, you got legal to protect. You need to have a legal reason to process that person's data. The data subject gave you specific, ambiguous consent to process it. So a lot of times you go in there and you get terms and conditions. It's 10 rows, right? GDPR says need to be ambiguous, right? Processing is necessary to execute or prepare to enter into a contract, to comply with a legal obligation, to save somebody's life, to perform a task in the public interest, or you have a legitimate interest to process someone's personal data, right? So GDPR said, TikTok, you just can't be randomly collecting people's data. What is your reason for that, right? You're an entertainment app, so you should just let people view it and don't track them, right? So that's why a lot of people struggle with GDPR, right? Is there a legitimate interest for you to track data? People can log in and look at TikTok videos, but you shouldn't be tracking their longitude and latitude, where they're at, their person, their race, their religion, right? But all the apps do that, right? I don't want to just pick on TikTok, right? So, but what is the reason to do all that? That's the question, right? So that's one reason people on the GDPR. Right? Then here's the privacy rights: right to be informed about your data, right to access it, right to erase it, right to restrict processing it, a right to data portability, meaning if you ask for your data and you want to give it to somebody else, to right to object. If somebody's got something out there you don't like, right, then you have the right to erase it, right? I object and I want it gone, right? In relation to automated decisions, marking, and profiling it, right? So these are some of the privacy rights when you're dealing with GDPR you need to build into your system. Right. Shout out to AI and me, right? How can you do this with machine learning, artificial intelligence to make it easier? Right. And I think that's why a lot of privacy people get paid is, and a lot of people don't like dealing with GDPR. Right. But I think in the future that's where it's going to. Right. So the Army is using personal geolocation in the article on. That's cool. I might have to go look on that. But yeah, geolocation is huge, and a lot of people are using that, right? So if you go out a certain area, your app will start working, or like engineering cannabis saying a lot of times they can say from this location, a lot of people would want to be in the service, right? In this location, a lot of people won't be in the service. So you can use your recruiting dollars, right, to maximize what you're doing. Really, that's what you're doing, and that's why you're using, right? So let's talk about lawful bias and transparency. What's the audit? An organization needs to have at least 250 employees or conduct the high-risk data processing and keeps it up to date. The best way to demonstrate GDPR compliance is using the impact assessment. Organization with fewer than 250 employees should also conduct assessment because it will make complying with GDPR other requirements easier. In your list, you should include the purpose of processing, what kind of data you're processing, who has access to the organization, any third parties, and what are you doing to protect the data, aka encryption. That's usually the number one. And when you plan to erase it if possible, how long you keep it, and what's your data retention, right, for erasing. Once again, they want legal justification. Processing of data is illegal under GDPR unless you can justify it according to one of 6 conditions. These are other provisions related to children in special categories. Note that if you choose consent as your lawful basis, there are extra obligations, including giving data subjects and an ongoing opportunity to revoke consent. If its legitimate interest is your lawful bias, you must be able to demonstrate you have conducted a privacy assessment, right? So I can do a privacy assessment, but under lawful, I'm sending that to legal because if we get sued, PBO don't want to personally get sued. But no, but those some of the things you need to understand is what is your legitimate interest, privacy impact, right? That's part of an assessment in GRC. So we always do an assessment, but it needs to be, once again, GDPR focused, right? Clear information. You need to tell people that you're collecting data and why. You should explain how the data is processed and who has access and how are you keeping it safe. This information should include in your privacy policy and provide data subject at the time you collect the data, right? So you have people opt in, then hopefully once a year you force them to opt in and read that long paragraph that nobody reads, right? But you should make it clear in that paragraph. So if they don't choose to read, it's on them, right? So data security. You must follow principle data protection by design. They were talking about the NIST framework in there. So that's what I would use. Data protection is something, now you have to consider whether you do anything with other people's personal data. You also need to make sure any processing of personal data here, the data protection principles, right? So that's the beautiful part. We just talked about the assessment is a way to help you understand how your product or service can jeopardize customer data, as well as how to minimize those risks. As a data protection impact assessment checklist on the website, GDPR requires organizations to carry this kind of analysis whenever they plan to use people data in such a way that it's likely to result in a higher risk to their rights and freedoms. All right. So once again, if you're doing this 800-53, or I might do another video and just look at the impact checklist for the assessments of a couple compliance, but they have a checklist. I looked at it. It's a lot smaller than this, right? What happens in a data breach? Long story short, 72 hours. I mean, if you get breached, you got 72 hours to let people know that they've been breached, or you're going to get a big fine. In the United States, a lot of people go on 24 hours now, so that's quite common. But once again, if you go a month, you're going to have a big fine. Even if you think you breached, I would say, here's a notification, we're looking at it, right? So, and two is you see how like communicate data breaches to your data subjects unless the breach is unlikely to put them at risk. Unless it's super proprietary, I will let them know. Consent, there's strict new rules about what is consent from a data subject. Consent must be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. Clearly distinguish them from other matters. You want it clear in plain English. Children under 13 can only get consent with permission from their parents. You need to keep documentary evidence of the consent. So when if they click on it or you got them signing something digitally, you need to keep that screenshot or whatever you're doing on the background, right? So when you get out of there, what that'll be, right? So a couple big things: accountability and governance. Designate someone responsible. We talked about that to ensure GDPR compliance. Sign a data processing agreement between your organization and any third parties. So if you're using APIs, you need to make sure they understand that they're GDPR compliant. If your organization is outside the EU, appoint somebody with one of the EU member states. We talked about this. Appoint a DPO, data protection officer, and we're gonna go back up. Those guys get paid and they're responsible to making sure you're in GDPR, right? Privacy, a couple bullet points: easy for your customers to request and receive, easy for your customers to correct or update inaccuracies, easy for your customers to request to have your personal data deleted. When you say deleted, I mean deleted. I deleted myself off of Facebook, came back a month later, signed back up, and now my data came back, right? So they never really deleted me, right? So, but when GDPR says delete, they mean really delete, right? Easy for your customers to ask for you to stop processing their data. Easy for your customers to receive a copy of their data. Easy for your customers to object to processing. And if you make a decision about people based on automated process, you have a procedure to protect their rights, right? So those are some of the big deals. And the biggest part of that, which I was trying to get a handle on, is how do you manage cookies? That's really what comes up when you talk about privacy, especially from a privacy engineer part. Right type of cookies. We're just going to hit these at duration. Session cookies are temporary and expire. Persistent cookies. These category encompass all cookies that remains on your hard drive until you erase them or your browser does. depending on your cookie expiration date. According to the e-privacy directive, these cookies shouldn't last no longer than 12 months, but in practice, they could remain for your device much longer. Yeah, most cookies, they remain until you delete them. That's why when you go somewhere and you come and you look at your ads are changing because they're following them cookies wherever you search on the internet, right? Provenance first party cookies, as the name implies, first party cookies are put on your device directly by the website you're visiting. Third party cookies, these cookies that are placed on your device not by the website you're visiting, but by a third party like an advertiser or analytic systems, right? So these are different types of cookies that people use. Right, strictly necessary cookies. These cookies are essential for your browser and the website use features as assessing secure areas of the site, cookies that allow web shops to hold your items in your cart while shopping online. Preference cookies are known as functionality cookies. These cookies allow a website to remember your choice you made in the past, like your language you prefer, what region you would like to report to, but what your username is and your password you can automatically log into. Statistic cookies allow as performance cookies collect information about how your websites use a website, like which page you visited and which links you clicked on. Marketing cookies track your online activities to help advertisements deliver more relevant advertisement or limit how many times you can see an ad. Right, so there's a ton of cookies. So let's look at what GDPR says about the cookie. It's the most comprehensive data protection. However, throughout its 88 pages, I only mentioned cookies once. Natural persons may be associated with online identities by these devices, tools, and protocols. Cookies identifiers or cookie identifiers or other identifiers such as radio frequency identification tag may leave traces, which in particular when combined with unique identifiers and other information may be used to create a profile of a natural person and identify. What these two lines are stating is that cookies, insofar as they are used to identify users, qualify as personal data and therefore subject to GDPR. Companies do not have the right to process user data as long as they receive consent or if they have legitimate interest. I'm sorry, companies do have a right, once again, as long as they receive consent or have legitimate interest. Right. So let's go back up to the top real quick. And once again, you can see different privacy laws around the globe. GDPR is right there, points, but there's a ton of other privacy laws on the planet. And most big companies follow these. This is the one we were talking about, TikTok, 200 300, right? Because they're collecting and following people, right? So they got to do GDPR. CCPA, once again, is California's. You see CPA over here. That's California privacy. So once again, if you're a privacy manager, you need to understand those. And at the bottom, we looked at a couple of those certifications. The big one is the CIPP. All right. So once again, I hang around. I just want to touch a little bit on GDPR. Let me know if you have any more questions. Once again, I get a few GDPR questions at work, and people reach out to me. I've been reached out a couple of times where people starting small companies and they're asking me GRC questions. And actually, one of the questions was talking about GDPR, right? They were trying to roll out something. So they were trying to figure out what is their GDPR requirements for that. And most people don't even worry about privacy requirements. Shout out to WireDog until at the end, until you hit by the breach, or is it till you get hit by your data breach? So once again, I want to do a quick lunch and learn. So we've been hitting it about 55 minutes. So PBO about to get a salad. He got to lose a little weight. PBO going on a diet. So once again, I'll hang out a little while, see if anybody have any questions. TGIF, I hope everybody has a good weekend. I dropped the link if anybody wants to come up. We're going to have about, I think, 6 or 7 people in the box. You know, GDPR isn't super popular. But once again, from that GRC perspective, I think it's a hidden gem. And you can see, you know, 200, 300, right? If you get the right skill set, or if you know, the right background, and 5 to 7 years, that's, you know, if you've been in IT, you right there in the mix. So once again, privacy, part of GRC. And even in the NIST 800-53, there's a privacy security family. So PBO is trying to make sure he has his privacy knowledge is down at a certain level. So in case he get hit with a couple questions, or at least once again, I try to have a basic understanding of a lot of these, because once again, you're in those meetings, questions come up, especially privacy. Privacy is a hidden gem. I probably do CCPA in probably a couple weeks. Cali do something specifically in the United States. I probably do CCPA, and New York's coming up with something similar to that. So I probably do both of those privacy. Once again, I get a lot of privacy questions inside of GRC. Governance, risk, and compliance, and on the compliance director, a lot of times it's privacy, depending on the size of your company. So hope everybody has a good weekend. Reach out if you need anything, professorblackops@gmail.com. Go check out my man AI and ME. Go check out Wired Dog. He's doing some great stuff. Casual Economist, always in the house. Check out John, my man, always in the house. Kenny, GRC, bro. I'm glad he came in. Hopefully he got a few things out there. Once again, if you need to reach out, professorblackops@gmail.com. Come check me out. Send me an email. We can definitely chop it up. I always give people 10 or 15 minutes of my time. You can always come up on the link. Sometimes people are shy though. If you don't want to drop something, but if you want to reach out me, professorblackops@gmail.com. Once again, everybody have a great week. Let me get out here and do a little work for their fire PBO. Everybody have a great weekend, and happy Mother's Day too.